Good morning, everyone. Let's see, a little bit of an echo. Let's see if we can fix that. All right, let's see if that works. So how are you all? We are so happy to have you here at the 2021 Global Cdh Conference. We have over 150 households and hospitals here registered this year who are here with us. We have no idea the number of actual attendees from each household who are watching us, but we are excited to have such a global audience this year. So it's absolutely wonderful. We missed everyone since our last conference in Nashville and hope to see you in person again in Toronto next year. But for this year, we are fully embracing this new format and welcoming so many patients, so many families who've never been able to attend before, and we promise to allow this alternative to all of our future conferences as well. So we're very, very excited about this progress and look forward to Toronto, but also to continuing this particular platform, including everyone. I hope that you all had a great time at the pizza party last night. There were definitely some laughs and some tears, and it was a wonderful event. And it's always wonderful to see so many familiar faces and to meet so many new families and to hear their stories. So I know it wasn't our normal it was virtual. It wasn't our normal traditional pizza party. We didn't get to have the parade of cherubs. We didn't get to see the kids in wings. We all weren't wearing conference shirts, and we didn't get to release balloons or blow bubbles in memory of our children lost. So please take the time today when you have a few moments between speeches or maybe this evening and go over to www.cherubs.org and look at the listed names that are on that website. It's a sobering reminder of what we are all here working for today. It is a tribute to all of the children who have fought CDH and who are still fighting, and a tribute to the memory of all the children that we have lost. Thousands and thousands of patients with congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And if you see a lot of ribbons by one or two or a lot of names, that's because the families have been fundraising to add additional ribbons by the name of their child. So take a look. If you are so moved, please donate and put more ribbons beside the name of a child, or just donate in general, especially for research. A few things to go over before we start today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our phone app. And if you have not downloaded the amazing Cdh Phone App, you really should do so. Tracy's going to try to post some pictures of that in just a second, as well as the links. Thank you, Tracy. And I'm not sure how well you can see this. Oh, probably not at all, the green screen. But it is free on Apple and Google Play, and it is absolutely amazing. It took us months to create it. We created it by hand. We learned how to program apps here at Cdh International because that's what we do, and we can't fund hiring experts. We learn how to do things ourselves. But this app is an incredible tool for researchers, for families who are just diagnosed. It has the Cdh parent reference guide right inside of it. It has the Cdh registry, it has the Cdh library, it has the apps for surgeons, so everything is in one place. You can talk to other families. There's an Instagram like social media setup right in here. It's connected to our forums. You can read the stories, the website, the blogs, and the wonderful thing that I think is the highlight of the whole map. I mean, we love supporting our families. We love giving you access to talk to each other. But to me, the most important thing in this app is the list of hospitals. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a speech that Jason and I are giving today. But while you're listening today, go download the app. Really, you can go to our website, cdhi.org/app. The links are right there to download it while you're listening and watching today, and just thumb through it and see what's available and look at all the hospitals that are listed in this app, and is by map, so that when a newly diagnosed family is given the information to download this app, they can see where the closest Cdh treatment center is. This summer, we're collecting information from all these hospitals so that we can put in all their statistics. It's completely unbiased. We'll be able to tell families how many patients these hospitals have each year, the survival rate of these patients, the different procedures that they have. And the list of hospitals comes from the Cdh Study Group and Cares for Kids, which is formerly Dreams. So we really need to get adjusted, start calling them Cares for Kids, because we've been calling them Dreams for a long time. But they're still the same wonderful people doing the same amazing research with a new name. So make sure to download the phone app. And a few housekeeping things before we start. You're allowed to type in any questions as we go. The researchers are all here. They will be answering questions in chat. Most of them have taped their speeches ahead of time so that they can talk to you during chat. And at the end of today at 5:30, all the researchers, Jason and myself, will be live on a panel to answer any of the questions that you may have. So if you would like more interaction, you can save those questions for later. You may accumulate more questions throughout the day. So jot them down, and we're happy to respond to you at 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. So everything that we're doing is on Eastern Time, and we apologize for that for our families who are overseas and are having to get up very early or stay up very late to participate. And we're very grateful to our researchers who are overseas and who are participating and who have sent in videos and who are going to make themselves available answering questions. We have researcher from Egypt and a researcher from Iran, and we're very grateful to both of them for adjusting their schedules so that they can be here. So some rules on today. Please, for the families, please do not ask any questions of the researchers that pertain specifically to your child. They cannot give you medical advice unless they are your child's specific doctor, excuse me, and they have your chart in front of them. It is unethical, dangerous, and a little illegal for them to give you medical advice when your child is not their patient. If you would like to connect with them and allow them to make an appointment with you so they can give you another opinion, that is perfectly fine. But this is not the venue to ask them for any specific medical advice for your child. We want everyone to be safe. We also want everyone to remember, all the families, no matter what you hear today, your child is different. Every single child is different. If amazing research comes out today, and it has, please do not, what is the correct word? Please do not be upset that this research was not available for your child. Every day is a new day, and every day we try harder, and every year we get farther and farther in progress on research. And as a grieving mom myself, I know how upsetting it is to start playing all the what ifs in your head. So please be mindful that we can't do that. It's not healthy, and it's not going to help aid newer children. So let's focus on the positive, what we can do right now, what we can help with our children right now and the children who have yet to be born. So we are going to stay focused on that. The researchers are all aware of the charity. They all know about the conference. Many of them have participated in our event live before. They are happy to answer your questions. A lot of them are going to give contact information at the end of their speeches, but they will also be here. And one more thing before we start, and I'm going to finish up a little bit early, and we'll let everyone adjust for our first two speakers from the Cdh Study Group. So we're really excited to have them. I just want to remind everyone that research is a responsibility of all of us. We are all equal players in this. Patients, the families, the researchers, the hospitals, the charities, we are all equally important, and we are all equally responsible. As patient families, we are the driving force behind research. We are the ones that push, we are the ones that fund, and we are the ones that encourage the researchers to keep continuing when they're banging their heads against the wall for decades, because they're just as frustrated as we are that we don't have the answers that we really want on what causes CDH and the best treatments and how to save these kids. But every single day we're getting closer. So we need to be mindful of that we're all playing on the same team and that we're all in this together. And every single one of us is equally important and responsible in this fight. So if you're a parent and you're watching this, that's me and you. It's not just the charity. The charity is a combination of all of us patient families working together to push research and awareness and to support each other. It is our responsibility. So everything that you see here today has to be funded. Every single speech, including the one from Cdh International. So we need to work together to help fund all the work that these incredible men and women are doing to try to save our children. So I think that's it for now. I can't see any questions because of where I'm at on the software. So we're going to let Matt and Tim start a little bit early if they want. If not, that's fine. But I'm going to sign off for this morning. Well, I'll see you guys in a little bit. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me in chat personally, and I'm happy to answer whatever I can. And we would also, really quickly, like to thank My City Med, Jeff and Eden, the brains behind all of the software, for all their hard work and staying up late and dealing with me for weeks. So we're very, very grateful to them. So have a great day, everyone. I look forward to learning a lot, and I look forward to talking with all of you. And please make sure to be here tomorrow as well. The researchers are all invited also for the roundtables and speeches from the teams at our charity. And have a great day, everyone.
All right, Dawn, thanks a lot for that great introduction. Hi to everybody. I see a lot of familiar names in the windows there. For anybody that I haven't been able to meet, I'm Matt Harting. I'm in Houston. And Dawn invited Dr. Jancelewicz and I, who is also there, looking like he's actually working, except his head's in the clouds there, per usual. To come and talk about a couple of things that we've been working on that we've been really, I think, fortunate to be able to be a part of. But I want to start by saying that there are a lot of different communities in medicine, small groups of people that are interested in something, or like-minded providers or whatnot. And one of the things that's really cool about the CDH community is that there's really an unbelievably collegial environment, and that there's a lot of collaboration. I just got off a call with somebody in California and Philadelphia, and we were talking about a specific upcoming meeting. And it's really exciting that we all get to collaborate on something that we're all very passionate about. And so, and a big part of that, as Dawn mentioned, is the families. And I think that Dawn and Cdh International and all the groups that work together to provide a space for families to come together and to be a part of that community is really special. So Dawn, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks to Cdh International, all the other groups that are a part of this. Tim is a pediatric surgeon as well in Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee and at Le Bonheur Children's Hospital. And Tim and I got to know each other actually when we went through the trail together to match in pediatric surgery. We became friends, and we had this shared interest in CDH, and that has led to a number of different projects and weekly meetings and active discussions. And we're just a small part of a big community that's a lot of fun. I see Dr. Scott and Dr. Zani on this, along with a number of other physicians who collaborate to work together. But Tim and I really enjoy, just hanging out. And as part of that, we enjoy talking about how we can improve the lives of kids with CDH and families who are dealing with CDH. In the next 45 minutes, we're going to try to cover a couple of topics that Dawn said were really important to families. We're going to try to cover things that might be useful for other physicians or trainees, but we're really going to gear this talk towards families. And the two things that we want to talk about that we've been keenly interested in are, number one, we'll talk a little bit about the Cdh Study Group. What is it? Why does it exist? And how does it serve to help families and patients with CDH? And we'll also talk about something that's maybe a little bit wrapped up in that, but also has a lot of spin-off components to it, which is standardization or collaborative development of protocols and ideas about maybe best practices, and how can we both learn from each other, but also help each other start to develop a potentially more standardized approach to an unbelievably complex disease, disease of Cdh. And so Tim and I are keenly interested in that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to let Tim get started here with this first slide. You're muted, Tim. There you go.
I don't see the slide.
Oh, let me start sharing screen. Sorry. Let me share. Sorry, let me go back then. I wasn't showing my my pictures here. Let me share this screen.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and it takes a while for Matt to sort of pick up the Zoom thing, but he's finally starting to get the hang of it, aren't you, Matt?
It's technology. So everyone missed these fun pictures of Tim and I going through training and hanging out and becoming friends and getting interested in Cdh. So can everyone see that now?
Yeah, that's good.
Good deal. Thanks, Tim.
So thanks, Dawn. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Matt. So Cdh is a super popular research topic in our community. And in fact, over time, there is sort of not exponential, but an increasing number of publications every year in Cdh. Despite that, we haven't really seen a corresponding reduction in mortality as striking as we would hope. So on the next slide, which Matt will talk about, we see that survival has improved a little bit over time, but not strikingly so. And this is despite all of our research efforts.
Yeah, so these data are from the Cdh Study Group, and I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about the Cdh Study Group. What is that? What does that mean? What's the function of the Cdh Study Group? But these data back to nearly 2000 show that about 30% of kids born with congenital diaphragmatic hernia don't survive. And that number today, if you look at an average line, and again, these are real numbers from submissions from, these are somewhere between 400 and 600 submissions from approximately 85 centers in, 16 or so countries, 16, 17 countries. We're not dramatically different than we were in 2000. And that might be a little bit disappointing to those of us that spend our mornings, nights, weekends, really working hard on this. At the same time, though, there is some hope in this, and there certainly are certain populations that may have improved. But I want to show you this line, and there's a lot more to come out on this relatively soon. But we have recently been trying to look at centers that are dedicated members of the Cdh Study Group and have been over long periods of time, relative to other centers who have been either in for some component of the time or are in and then have to drop out for a period of time for whatever reason. And it looks like there actually is an improvement in survival or a decrease in mortality over time among specific centers that are consistent members of the Cdh Study Group. Now, we don't know why this is. There could be a lot of different reasons why this is, but we're hopeful that being part of a community that is dedicated to focusing on getting better at taking care of these patients really has meaning and helps to bring best practices to certain hospitals, even though it's difficult to identify what some of those best practices are. And we think that, again, just talking about it and being a part of really difficult discussions, but learning from your mistakes, learning where there are opportunities to get better, learning from other hospitals who have maybe unexpected successes is really an important part of this. One of the things that we do is we break down patients, because we say certain patients we would maybe expect to do better than other patients because Cdh is not created equal. And it's an important take-home message for all parents and for families. One Cdh is not the same as another. Don mentioned that all of these children are unique and equal, and certainly in the eyes of parents, we all think that our kids are unique, but there are really clear data that one Cdh is very, very likely to survive and to go on to do very well. And another CDH, there's almost no chance that they're going to survive. And there's all a spectrum in between, right? You can see here in high risk shown in red and low risk shown in blue, there's a clear difference in their mortality, right? Or the likelihood that they're not going to survive. In high riskers, it's up at 40%, and for certain subgroups, it's even at 50 or 60%. For lower risk patients, it's at 20%, and for some really, really low risk patients, it's 10% or even less. But you see, even over time, and these are more recent data, 2008 to 2017, relatively stagnant rates, maybe slightly better in lower risk patients, but maybe slightly worse even in higher risk patients. And so these data really drive Tim and I and a whole host of researchers to say, why is that? You know, what can we do to get better? And so we certainly have to ask ourselves, why is there a lack of improvement, right? So Tim's going to take over and talk a little bit about that over the next couple of slides.
So that lack of improvement is especially frustrating because we have all kinds of fancy approaches to treating kids with CDH. We have developed approaches with the ventilator called lung protection strategies that try and protect the lung from getting injured, from blowing air into it too hard or fast. We've used nitric oxide, which helps dilate the blood vessels in the lungs, and other pulmonary vasodilators. And we have operative or surgical approaches to CDH that have been developed and adapted over time that we believe have saved lives. And that one in particular is called delayed repair, where we wait for a baby to stabilize before we subject them to an operation. But and then we've also used ECMO or ECLS, extracorporeal life support, in about a third of patients. And then despite all of these fancy approaches, we are not seeing a lot of improvement. And in addition to that frustration, the real reality is that studies or research, randomized trials, are not available or are very rare in CDH. And so we can't really answer the question of whether these moves, these special tricks that we have, our modalities are working or not, and what is the best approach to an individual baby. We've done all the studies that we can really using a retrospective approach, meaning we take patients and we look back and see whether what we did worked. Retrospective studies just are not good enough to answer these questions. On top of all that, if you go center to center, we see that CDH babies are managed pretty differently depending on who's doing the managing. And that management variability makes it very difficult to figure out what the right approach is. And then on top of all that, as Matt just said, CDH has a broad spectrum of severity. One baby is not equivalent to another. One baby is going to be a lot sicker than another baby. One baby is going to respond to an intervention and the other baby may not respond to that. All of these facts make an unfavorable soil for clinical trials. It's very, very difficult to answer a question with a good study because of all of this variability. So as researchers, that's incredibly frustrating. So how do we improve survival in CDH without randomized trials? In other words, how do we know which management techniques are working best for these babies? And what can we do to improve it? Well, the answer is really, number one, standardization of care. If we don't have sort of an agreement on how to manage these babies across centers, we're not going to be able to interpret the results of an intervention because we don't have consistent management center to center. So we have to get centers to align care. We have to get different stubborn doctors to agree to manage babies the same way across multiple centers before we can do a trial. And then once we have that sort of equivalent base or foundation of management, then we can do prospective studies or prospective trials where we make a change, do something for one group of babies and not for another, and then follow up to see which approach has worked and what we should do in the future for those babies.
So I think that as we think about this, the point that Tim and I wanted to really make sure that everyone understands in these first few slides is a lot of people working hard, but very, very difficult to do what is really considered the best type of trial or study in order to really know, hey, what's the best way to manage a patient with CDH? And we know that to families that can be frustrating. We should all just agree there's one best thing, and we should move forward. And perhaps the timing, we're at this time in our nation, really, and in our world, where so much change has led to a lot of people questioning how should we move forward. And I read this article by Don Berwick, and so I think that there's a little bit of serendipity in this time and in having this discussion right now. In this viewpoint piece, Don Berwick talked about 6 properties of care which may actually experience durable change as we move into really what is a new era. And those 6 properties of care were tempo, so the pace at which we do things and at which we do work; standards, our thoughts about standards and what standards are necessary or should be required; working conditions, right? How do we optimize the way healthcare professionals interact in their environment and what occurs in their environments; proximity, relative location to care or their proximity to optimal treatment; preparedness, how prepared are we really for the challenges; and equity, how good are we at optimizing care for all and ensuring that all has an equal opportunity to the care. So regarding standards, and I think it's really, really germane to CDH, he brought up this point: will the new normal embrace global learning, shared knowledge, and trusted expertise as foundations for reducing harmful, wasteful, and unscientific variation in care? And we know that this occurs in CDH. And this statement, I think, or this question is really at the center of what Tim and I and a whole host of other clinical scientists are thinking about when we think about how to best care for kids. I want to know how to best care for the CDH patient that's in front of me. But what the real challenge is, as does Tim and every other surgeon and neonatologist and critical care doctor that is faced with a patient right in front of them. But what we really can do and how we really can leave a mark here is by helping every clinician take care of every CDH patient. And the work that we're trying to do really serves to address those issues. And so to address that type of variation or wasteful or unscientific care, alignment or standardization, as Tim was just talking about, is really an important component to where we need to go. Okay. And so the first question you have to ask yourself is, are we really on to something novel? Is this like a new thing, or are there other things we can look to, other diseases or other models? And it turns out there are other diseases. In appendicitis, clinical practice guideline development and measuring standardization or sticking to a really focused way of addressing this problem not only works, it improves care, it lowers the cost of care, it increases patient satisfaction. And there are really, really good bodies of evidence that show that if centers stick to clinical practice guidelines and adhere to best practices, if you can agree to those, that patients do better. Now, I want to caution everyone. So it sounds great. It's like, hey, great. It was done in appendicitis. Let's just do it in CDH. Well, it's not quite that simple. Number one, appendicitis as a disease has a mortality that is not zero, but it's really, really close to zero. It's very infrequent, almost unheard of, that a patient with appendicitis doesn't survive. Okay, so we're talking about diseases that have different outcomes and different ramifications. Number two, the complexity of care required to treat appendicitis is dramatically lower. In other words, it's less complex. It involves less complex equipment, labs, teams of physicians, intensity, time. All of these things are very different for appendicitis as compared to CDH, okay? And so, again, getting this across the finish line in appendicitis is important, and this really helps to inform care for this disease for centers all over the world. But this is a very different disease than CDH. It gives us hope. It certainly provides a roadmap for how challenging it may be, but it's on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 2, and CDH is a 12. And so we have to understand that this is important, but it's really, really difficult to make comparisons. Okay, so what about in CDH? Well, our friends in Europe really led the way by developing a consortium consensus initially in the 2010 kind of time period, and even earlier than that. I think they've been working on this since really the early 2000s, and then they updated that only about 5 years ago to inform best practices. And some of these things have led to best practice acceptance in the United States, but there of course are differences by area, differences in different hospitals, people that do or don't believe that some of the things that are articulated in this type of a consensus are really the best things. And in different hands with different surgeons or different neonatologists, there remains disagreement about that. But this is a really important step in the right direction, and a huge kudos to all of those centers and individuals in Europe that have worked to come together to say, we have to do this. This took, years and years and repeated meetings and, really contentious discussion about the evidence for these types of things. And so this is certainly one thing that has come around. Tim's going to talk about how Canada has addressed this.
So I'm actually originally Canadian, but came to the United States in 1999. But then went back to Canada for my pediatric surgery fellowship in 2011 to 2013. And I got to sort of experience, again, sort of as a physician, the Canadian system. And because there's universal healthcare in Canada, it is sort of a little easier to generate a set of clinical practice guidelines and then follow them. Because everybody sort of it's easier to work together when you don't have a patchwork insurance infrastructure. So they developed clinical practice guidelines for the management of CDH, and they even made an app for it called the Canadian CDH Collaborative Clinical Practice Guidelines CDH app, which you can download on your phone if you are interested.
And it has 3 ratings.
Yeah, it has 3 ratings. I don't know why. Why does it have more ratings? It's really cool. It's got different sections. For example, the perinatal postnatal section talks about ventilation, imaging, the role of extracorporeal life support, when babies are ready for surgery, et cetera. And then you can go into detail for the studies that are available for each of those sections. So if you're a parent of a newborn with CDH, this might be a good app for you to kind of at least look at some of the evidence that's out there and sort of understand what's happening to your baby, because it's extraordinarily complicated. So this might be a useful tool. Also looking, for example, at ventilation, they have pretty good evidence there for how to treat these babies and then what should be done when they're born. Also, which I think is really cool, is they have risk calculators, which might be useful for clinicians and for families to look and see what kind of high risk or low risk CDH we're dealing with when you have a newborn. There's lots of different ways to measure severity of the CDH.
No, it's important, and Tim and I want to. Number one, we show this again just for neither one of us were intimately involved in the development of this, but it's a great example of some of the collaborative work that's coming out. But we also want to clearly caution people about going on and trying to interpret some of the things that are said. People that think about CDH all the time, constantly, and have taken care of hundreds of kids still find these patients to be unbelievably complex. So using this to interpret what should or shouldn't happen to an individual patient it can be really, really challenging. And so again, I just want to put that disclaimer out there that because you search something up and you think, well, maybe this is right for my child, but maybe the right way to handle that is to approach your team and say, hey, I did look at this. Is this something that, are we thinking right about this, or does this not apply to our child for a given reason? And it really might be something that stirs a fruitful discussion. But
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And if you go ahead.
I just was going to say, I think one of the things that that is really important to families, we're going to talk a lot about some nuanced details about care or about management on extracorporeal life support or on a ventilator or whatnot. This is a picture of a Cdh patient at the bedside, and I think just this picture really typifies the complexity. They're on an ECMO, heart-lung bypass support. You've got all these monitors, all these pieces of data, and you're not even seeing all the different team members, specialists in care of the heart or specialists in care of the lungs and surgeons and critical care doctors and just this huge group of teams of radiologists and then all the nurses. And I mean, you have a huge number of folks that are all trying to work together to drive a path in an unbelievably complex patient. And so in order to get to the point where you can inform that, you really have to walk a very delicate road in helping people come on board without telling them this is the only way to do it, because people have very strong opinions about why they practice the way they do and how they've spent so much time learning about that. And so that go ahead, Tim.
Especially surgeons. Surgeons are especially stubborn. So it's like herding cats. There's no way we can get them all to work together. It's not easy.
So this variability in management, why does it happen? I want to show some examples. I want to show some graphical examples of this variability in management. One example is the use of a therapy called inhaled nitric oxide. On average, centers use this therapy just over 60% of the time. So for just over 60% of Cdh patients, centers think that it's an appropriate therapy. But the range commonly, some centers only use it 40% of the time for whatever reason. Some centers use it 80% of the time. And that's from the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. If you look over the full range of centers that submit to the Cdh Study Group, some centers use it 100% of the time. Some centers use it 0. So you can see that with just this one therapy, some people really believe in it. Some people think it doesn't do anything at all. And there are centers that are all in between. That's just one therapy. What about, we talked about ECMO or extracorporeal life support use. Some centers hardly use it at all. Some centers use it on over half of the kids that have Cdh. And these are over long periods of time. Well, what about surgical repair? That seems easy, right? You can't survive unless you repair the defect. Some centers only have kids get to surgical repair 60% of the time. Others, it's almost 100% of Cdh kids. So you can see just in 3 cornerstones, a medicine, a therapy or a supportive therapy, and surgical intervention, there's this enormous range where one would think, gosh, these ought to be things that centers are aligned about or that there's consensus around. Now, again, I want everyone to be careful. The interpretation of this has an enormous amount of complexity. All Cdh kids are not created equal. Some parents would elect for comfort care before their child is even born for various reasons. And so they wouldn't make it to surgical repair because that's a parental choice. However, the variability in management is huge, and it's important to understand that. And we think these data show that. And so let's talk about where some of those data came from. The Cdh Study Group, or colloquially known as the CDHSG. this was something that was really the brainchild of Kevin and Pam Lally. Kevin Lally is a pediatric surgeon, Pam Lally is a pediatrician, and it turns out an expert in database design and management. And they said, gosh, can't we get together and develop a database of Cdh patients that would help to inform, because there's only so many patients at any given center. It's a relatively rare disease. And if we have large numbers of patients, that's going to be a much stronger way to study. These individual center studies are just not the right way to develop data or best evidence in Cdh. And so in the early 90s, they began to have meetings with other interested folks at something called the Extracorporeal Life Support Organization. This is an organization of groups and centers that support patients on ECMO or extracorporeal life support, right? And so voluntary data collection and submission began in 1995, right? So over 25 years ago, from centers that were interested in submitting their data to a central repository. It was called the Cdh Study Group. And these are notes from an initial meeting in 1991, right? There was universal agreement that such a study group had to be created because there was no better way to study Cdh. And they were going to collect data on Cdh patients, and there was going to be a collective attempt to answer questions regarding Cdh patients. So that's great, right? And one of the great nuances to this that I always highlight was that there was a willingness to work together and attempt to put aside previous biases and large egos to collectively address Cdh patient management. And it's true, these things, this is very raw and honest, but this is a reality in medicine, and this is what Tim and I want to help to overcome, are those biases, because those biases are so strong. We know the right thing to do because we were trained that way or we've seen it work. But the reality is what works in one patient may not be best for all patients and may not be the right way to develop practices. And so the Cdh Study Group was really this collaborative to try to work to do that. This began in 91 and data collection didn't begin in 95. It took 4 years just to get people together to start to submit data to a central repository. So now, as we look globally, how many member centers are there? All of these dots represent member centers. There's over 85 centers in 17 countries covering 6 continents that submit. That is a huge accomplishment. Tim and I were like barely in high school when this started. And over the last 25 years, it has grown and grown and grown. And these are centers that are committed to collaborating, to getting better at this. A lot of them in North America, many of them in Europe, but you can even see South America, Africa, Japan, Australia, a lot of commitment from centers to share their data, to open their playbook and say, hey, we want to be a part of the solution here. Which is really, really a huge thing. And so these are centers that submit data specifically on their Cdh patients, all to be put together to address specific questions. There's been 5 versions of data collection. Version 1, I'm going to quickly go through this again so people understand what has happened over time. From 1995 to 2000, the goal was just to define the problem, understand what medications were being used, what were the ventilator strategies, who was using ECMO. Version 2 was from 2001 to 2006. Now we knew a little bit about the problem and who was doing what. We needed to understand the details about how their lungs were working, about what they looked like when they were discharged, and about what heart abnormalities were involved and were associated with Cdh. From 2007 to 2014, we wanted to really stage, because we knew that all Cdh patients were not created equal. And so we need to be able to speak the same language. When we were talking at different centers, if one center said my survival was 95% and another center said my survival was only 60%, why is it so different? Is it that the centers are doing things differently, or are those Cdh patients different? Are these centers patients much less sick than these center patients? And we needed to classify the defect, the actual diaphragm defect. From 2015 to 2020, version 4, we started to know, and we had the idea that the heart and the role of the pulmonary blood vessels was really important. How would prenatal diagnosis change things? And so we started to collect prenatal data. and what cardiac disease, not structural cardiac disease, but the function of the heart, how would that play a role? And then again, the role of the blood vessels. And then starting just now in 2021 to present, we're in version 5, and we're asking more specific questions based on all the things we've learned previously and the contributions of all the centers to asking really important questions. The Congenital Diaphragmatic Hernia Study Group has published over 65 really sort of central publications that people look to when thinking about how these patients should be managed. And although this is an important strategy, collecting central data, and just yesterday, Ashley Ebanks, who's on this call and who really is a central driver to the Cdh Study Group, she not only sort of coordinates the entire program, interfaces with centers, helps centers get going, helps them learn how to collect and submit data, and then puts all that data into a real central repository. Just sent me yesterday, we're over 13,000 Cdh patients that have been collected. That's a huge milestone, and one we look forward to reaching 15,000 and 20,000 and 30,000. There's a lot of work to be done here. But although we're collecting all these data, there still are things that we can't do. There still are limitations to the types of studies we can do. And we can't evaluate certain strategies in a robust, non-biased way. And so it's a foundation, but we hope that the Cdh Study Group and all the centers that work together is now a foundation for prospective trials. We need to move past some of the expert opinion and consensus to develop better evidence. And so Tim's going to talk about a couple of the projects we've done in standardizing care. And over these last 13 minutes, we'll talk about some of the future things we are working on.
So our goal is to achieve some degree of standardization so that we can then do prospective trials in congenital diaphragmatic hernia. The reason we want to do that is because standardization of care has the potential to improve outcomes and reduce resource use in Cdh. Use of clinical practice guidelines is a really good idea for certain conditions. It's ideal if you have a condition that is costly to take care of, like congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and that has high variability in care, so that you can develop a set of core management standards that improve outcomes. So this has been seen in other conditions like appendicitis, solid organ injury from trauma, pancreatic, head surgery, and colorectal surgery. So why not in Cdh? As we've talked about, Cdh management is variable because of a number of reasons. One is each center has a different volume of Cdh patients. So there are some centers that see 10 or more Cdh patients per year, and there are centers that see fewer than 5 Cdh patients per year, sometimes just 1 or 2 per year. There's also a lack, as we talked about, of really good evidence in Cdh. And then lots of different specialties take care of Cdh patients. You have pediatric surgeons, you have neonatologists, you have intensive care teams that are all involved in care, and that results in highly variable care. And then Cdh affects lots of different parts of the body, not just your lungs, heart, and then long-term, all kinds of other issues can come up. And there's lots of different ways that we have to treat Cdh patients, with surgery, with the ventilator, and all of those different modes of care result in variability in management. But we didn't really know how variable things are, so we decided to look at that. And one way to do that is to look at clinical practice guidelines that exist currently at centers around the United States.
And we're going to cover this pretty quickly. We know that we only have about 10 minutes left. And so we'll go through this and try to address these questions reasonably quickly.
So we wanted to see what individual centers were actually doing. So we looked at everybody's clinical practice guidelines. We asked 68 centers, hey, send us your written guidelines for your Cdh patients. And we ended up with 27 different centers, CPGs, clinical practice guidelines. And then we looked at them and reviewed them and looked at what was in them. And the bottom line is that there were lots of different elements in these clinical practice guidelines because Cdh is a very complex disease. Lots of centers discussed indications for use of ECMO or ECLS. Lots of centers discussed when to operate on Cdh patients. These are all called criteria for transitions in care. So there were some key elements that we saw over and over again in these clinical practice guidelines. We also saw some alignment in what people do to manage Cdh patients. And one area of alignment was sort of these target numbers that clinicians are looking for when they're taking care of Cdh patients. Most clinicians at most centers wanted a certain pH of 7.2. They were tolerant of a certain oxygen saturation, around 85, and they were tolerant of a certain level of carbon dioxide of 65. And so this alignment in what we saw center to center to us was very encouraging because it suggests that it is possible to get all of these different centers to agree on care management. And then similarly, some of these little details in management, there was some consistency center to center. And then after we did this study separately, we were working on whether it would be possible to standardize or at least to kind of come up with some kind of consensus management statement for the use of ECMO or extracorporeal life support, which is just a big, huge, scary part of Cdh care. And it took a number of years, but we were able to, through expert consensus, come up with a set of recommendations for managing Cdh patients with ECMO. But even within this statement, there wasn't agreement amongst all of these clinicians who were involved in the paper. But we're heading towards some sort of international or national agreement in how to manage babies with ECMO. And it's just so complicated.
We realize that some of these slides are busy. The point is not for everyone to grasp all the details, but to understand that these two studies show that there is some movement towards alignment and some acceptance of some standard practices. So we'll talk very briefly about this. Tim, you want to quickly cover this?
Sure. So we are moving towards getting centers to agree on a sort of standard approach to Cdh management, and then to do a prospective study to look at inhaled nitric oxide to see if it is a good medication in Cdh patients. So we're doing this really complex design, but this is a great step forward in prospective research in Cdh that we're hoping that will serve as a model for future studies so that we can answer some of these questions in details of management, like should we use nitric oxide? So this is the question that we decided to start with, and we're submitting a grant request to try and get funding to perform this study with NIH.
And it's one example of a lot of different things that are going on, but we sort of want everyone to know there's a lot of movement towards trying to study these things in a collective way. And I'll talk a little bit about, I'll show some example slides of what we're trying to do, and this trial is an example of that. Another thing is that we always get asked about long-term follow-up, and the Cdh registry or Cdh study group now collects data on kids before they're born, collects data on kids right after they're born, all the way until they are discharged, and then it stops there. And we're now finishing pilot trials on long-term follow-up because, of course, everyone wants to know, well, what's my child going to be like when they're 2 or 5 or 10? These data are really difficult to collect in a very meaningful way, in a way where you can do research on them, but we've just finished the pilot component of this in the Cdh study group. And so later in 2021, that will go live to all the centers so that they can begin and continue to submit data. And the goal is that ultimately we will have linkable data for prenatal, early postnatal, and then 2, 5, 10, and beyond year-old age kids so that we can know what happens long-term. So we're excited about this. This is soon to come up. So let me use an illustrative example here as we finish up about what management standardization might look like. We've talked a little bit about it and what we're trying to do, right? Care, it turns out, is like this, right? All these dots represent different institutions, right? And it's really variable. And it's not just Cdh, it's a lot of different things, right? And in a perfect world with perfect trials and an infinite amount of understanding, there really is probably only one right way to do things, right? And so in a perfect world, every single center would do this, okay? right? And this is not possible. This is not the reality. There's no way we're going to get everybody to do the exact same thing for every single patient, because number one, we don't know what that is. And even if we did, getting everybody to agree on that would be an enormous challenge, really an impossible thing to do, right? So instead, what we'd like to do is just take wildly variable care, which we know leads to worse outcomes, and get centers to do this. Let's get closer. And we know this is possible based on the information that we had before. And if we can get centers to be closer, right, then maybe with small and improved data, which we're working on, maybe we can get them to come together a little closer where it's close to being standardized, right? Or very similar. And if we then have centers that are doing things in a similar way, we can ask questions. A certain type of support that we provide, it may not be helpful. So let's have all the centers start by doing that support, and then let's shift to not doing that support and see if we can compare those two groups. Who does better? Because we've got to learn and we've got to be able to move forward. Let's look at something else that's possible. If we have all the centers and there's two different ways of doing surgery, some centers are going to be comfortable with one way, some centers are going to be comfortable with another because that's their current practice. We have them shift and we compare their strategies doing early surgery versus late surgery. This opens the door for doing trials in a center-based fashion in a way that sticks with the standard of care, optimizes our way of learning, and helps us to get to the next stage. We think this is exciting, but it's really going to take a lot of work. If this is achievable by the end of my, I'd say, lifetime, it would be a huge accomplishment. We think we can learn more in a shorter period of time and at a fraction of the cost. So I'm going to bring everybody back to this picture to finish up here in the last couple of minutes. We spent a lot of time talking about this. We spent a lot of time talking about this and all these numbers that we get. And that's what oftentimes clinicians can get stuck into that rut. But I really do want to bring it back to this. The small child that's the recipient of all this. And I hope that families understand that as folks that wake up early in the morning and stay late at night and spend our weekends, thinking about this, we want to bring this back to the patient. And the reason that we do this is we think every single patient can benefit from this work. And Tim and I get the good fortune of delivering these types of talks, and we love doing it. And we love, being a part of it and interacting with other scientists and other families. But we represent a world's worth of people willing to collaborate on this. And we can only do this work because of really, really dedicated collaborators, really dedicated families, and really an enormous commitment to collaborating to make things better for kids and families with CDH. And so we hope this has been helpful to you. We appreciate the opportunity, and we look forward to active discussion about this. Thank you very much.
Did we have any questions?
All right. Thanks again to Cdh International. We appreciate the opportunity. Thanks to the families who are working to educate yourselves and be a part of a really important community. And we look forward to crossing paths again soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, everybody.